This Thrive Loud episode is brought to you by Hinge Consulting. Success on Amazon hinges on well-executed strategies. Contact Hinge Consulting to learn about total Amazon channel management and to see if your business has what it takes to grow over 300% over the next 12 months. That's Hinge Consulting at hingeconsulting.co.
Have you been boring yourself with uninteresting podcasts made by monotone and overly serious people? Are you tired of hearing the same stuff every day on NPR? Then please consider helping us on our mission of making Thrive Loud the #1 business podcast. Because, well, let's be honest, we're #1.
Get ready to Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond, and today on Thrive Loud, I bring you change management speaker and consultant, author, the serious stand-up comedian, the white guy whisperer, Thrive Loud listeners, not your typical diversity speaker. Jess Pettitt is with us today. Jess, how are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
This is always a lot of fun. I'm always a big fan of getting speakers on the show. One, because they actually have fun conversations on our show. But two, you've got a really cool message and a really good story on how you got to it. If you could help educate to the Thrive Loud community some of the roads and bumps, I guess, that got you to where you are today. And we'll talk about a lot of great things. Your book, what you've been speaking about, and obviously diversity, which is certainly something that I think we could all talk about a little bit. So sound like a plan?
Yeah, absolutely.
All righty. I'm going to pass the ball to you and let you drive down the court. Take it off, Jess.
Well, I appreciate the basketball reference. I'm not very good at sports ball, but I picked up on that. What is interesting, I think, when we talk about my journey, when in the context of thriving, really, in order to thrive, you really have to note and take a hold of the times that you've been really burnt out. And I did some pretty basic diversity, social justice trainings and keynotes for over a decade. And about 3 years ago, found myself incredibly crispy and burnt out, and either decided I needed to quit or figure out a new approach. And I couldn't really quit because I don't really have any other skills other than I do know how to fold a fitted sheet. But
which, by the way, is very difficult to do.
It is. It's not really monetizable. And so I was stuck doing this. So I had to figure out a new approach. And that's how Good Enough Now kind of was birthed, was out of that burnout. And what I realized is in myself, my audiences, my friends, my family, this kind of common theme that really was solved by doing the best you can with what you got some of the time. And now that's what I do.
Oh. So I was just talking to you right before we hit record here, and was watching some of your videos and some of your messages. Tell us a little bit about this angle that you go in, and I actually like the way you describe this, that you can't do anything until you first start with yourself. And then from there, things can happen. You talk a little bit about how you approach, I guess this is a little bit on how you approach coaching, but also a lot of how you approach a lot of things in what you do.
Yeah. So I was raised by professional athletes. And so I've used that as kind of a metaphor. I think it's a lot easier to critique other people's form, intake of food, the amount of exercise that they do or don't do, how they're doing it, what they're wearing while they're doing it. We've become a culture of tearing things down, and instead of really building things up. And sometimes I think the building up sounds like cheerleading for the person who's actually exercising. But how I'm taking it is that's still all external. And in order to really make change and to thrive, what one has to do is not do as much external work, certainly not external work if you're not doing internal work. And so I've taken everything about diversity and social justice work and flipped it to really being about what am I responsible for, which, spoiler alert, is who and how I show up. And then if you can work in that space, then you're actually going to make some progress.
Well, let's dive a little into that. Give us, if you could, the top line bit of the who and how you show up. Let me get an understanding of, so the listeners can understand a little bit how you're directing and focusing on this.
So if we take it from exercise out and put it into diversity training, a lot of times we'll show up and we assume that if we get like an updated vocabulary list, you know, like a handout or something, and we know all the right words, then we won't offend anybody ever again. And then when we find out we've offended somebody, we're like, what? I went to this conference. I even bought a t-shirt. Like, I didn't offend you, which is an interesting statement in itself. You can't tell someone they either are or are not offended if they have told you they are offended. So instead of gathering vocabulary words or collecting different experiences or collecting different people with different identities, what I'm challenging people to do is to do the internal piece of noticing the patterns of how they show up. When do they disappear? When do you engage? Let's take challenging conversations. When do you engage? Like, oh, this is going to be fun. Let's do this. And when do you steer away? Like, dun, dun, dun. Oh, I don't want to engage with this person on this thing. But if you change the person or the thing, you can have a challenging conversation, right? So like, when do you make those adjustments? That's being responsible for who and how you are.
I like this. It's really interesting. I had a conversation. We're recording this right after one of the holiday weekends of the year, although who would know what it is, because here in the Northeast, it's actually snowing in the spring. So go figure. We had a conversation about when are we going to get to a point in time where we can just say what we think or what we mean and have no intention of offending people, but really actually cut to the issues of what people want to talk about. And this was actually in relation to full honesty. This was actually one of my children were describing. They didn't know how to call their teacher, because the teacher is a transgender and used to be a he and is now a she. And now literally the conversation was they didn't know how to direct her as opposed to a Mr. or a Mrs., because that's the vocabulary we've been given. And we had this conversation. Do you think we'll ever get to a point in time when we'll just say things for how they are and not feel offended or awkward or uncomfortable or have to apologize? And I'd be interested to hear your take on that.
Sure. So two things. I'm going to role model kind of how to do this, and then we'll answer your question. So here's an example, right? So you're replaying to me a conversation you had with your own kid. So I'm not going to like teach you how to be a parent. I don't have kids unless you are also a dog owner.
I am a dog owner. Yes.
So that's a conversation you have with your kid. Okay, good. But I'm only a dog owner. I am not a children's haver. So, so if the bad way of doing what I'm about to do would be you use the wrong word and completely derail the fact you were asking a question on your podcast, right? So the right way to do this is, great question. Let's talk about it. Before we do that, just some education is your kid's teacher would identify probably as a trans woman, not as a transgender, because you wouldn't use the word transgender as much as someone happens to be transgender, or someone happens to be trans is even more inclusive. Okay, fun facts. So then to the question is about what language to use when we're talking about gendered pronouns or gendered ways that we address other people with authority or respect. That is also a really good conversation to have. And however that person actually identifies. So in this case, the teacher probably goes by ma'am or miss or Mrs. or something like that, right? So that's and uses feminine pronouns like she and hers more than likely. So that's the answer to the child's question. And then you asked a question that my understanding is informed by your kid's conversation, which is, when can we have a conversation without having to like walk on eggshells and tiptoe around? And my premise is that could happen as soon as we realize that every other person we're interacting with is having a very different experience than us. And that's the hardest part.
Which is the hardest part. I totally agree with you. And I think we're at a stage which is, at least we're addressing the issue, because for a long time we weren't on any matter, on any of these topic of conversations. It could be race, gender, politics, whatever it might be. We're so there's a component of what we've been living in a very PC world that makes it we're afraid to say certain things to offend anybody. And then, of course, we want to have the lines of conversation to make sure that we're educating and communicating as well. So it's definitely, by the way, challenging, but also eye-opening. Mm-hmm. And I think it's where I'm seeing a lot of it in helping people connect and how they connect with people. And I'm sure you see a lot of it in diversity training across and in many of the places that you speak and educate people with.
Absolutely. But even with the PC movement, like it was well-intentioned, but I think it's actually done more harm than good in the sense that its intention was to notice like the linguistic roots or our dependency on like usually the word man or something related to white being good or black being bad or clean and dirty when we start talking about like illnesses or disease. The idea originally was just to notice that the language we use doesn't describe everyone that we're talking about. So what's happened is now we're terrified of offending each other. Now we don't know what words to use. So that didn't really help. But so when I say just being mindful that people have a different experience, even when people talk about like the wage gap, for example, you know, that women earn $1 less than men. Well, first off, that's only talking about white women and white men. So if we're really going to talk about like all women, the average is $1.47 less than the average of all men. But now you're being inclusive, but we just forget sometimes from our own places of privilege that we don't actually represent everybody in our information.
What is the most challenging work that you're doing? I know I've seen you speak and you're educating lots of people about your message on what your book is about. We'll get that into a second. What I wanted to know was what I guess is the most pressing topic right now today that you're running into, because there are so many different avenues in diversity training that people are running into. A lot of challenges. Is one topic hotter than another?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that people think topics change by geography. So like in the South, this is more of a hot button, but in the North, this is more of a hot button. And the reality is that that's not true. They're all hot buttons. But I do have to kind of listen to guide to what the meeting planner or the meeting organizer or something thinks are the hot issues, and then really listen for the ones that are also there, but they're scared of mentioning, right? So like, instead of avoiding all these topics, I have to talk about all of them. So I would say right now, and keeping this kind of evergreen time-wise, any political election tends to be like a third rail of a conversation. We live in a culture where you're not supposed to talk about if you did vote, and if you did vote, who you voted for. You're not really supposed to ask people who they voted for. And then at least in the last year or so, I would say the most recent presidential election, though it actually followed patterns of other presidential elections. People don't like it when I say that, but it's true if you do your homework. But right now, I would say in the workplace primarily, people are very nervous to talk about politics because everything seems so polarizing. So I usually lead with this topic. Yeah. And the main reason is that when we look at polarization, if I'm too lazy to do something to actually polarize myself against, a group of people. So then if I'm not doing anything, I just assume they're the ones doing all the polarization. But if I enter a conversation as if they are the ones doing all the polarizing, I'm not really listening, and I'm going to enter that conversation in a very different manner. So I usually start here with like, what if we just stopped that and actually just lean into a conversation as if we're going to learn something, not as if we have all the answers, but that the other person we're talking to could teach us something. Bringing that sense of curiosity and generosity back to difficult conversations will help, and it's certainly needed right now.
Yeah, and more so than ever. And you made an interesting point about people not talking about in the workplace. I had a client who, one of the things that they needed to do, they have televisions around the office, and usually they kept them on news channels. And within a certain period of time, all the channels actually started getting moved to sports channels. And that was not because there was any sporting event going on. It was to avoid putting on one particular news medium, which might lean one direction, or another news channel, which might lead another. And all they keep doing is keep pounding and pounding and pounding with all this, that it became almost impossible to say, well, look what's going on in the White House, or look what this person's saying. And it became to the point where it became even more polarizing than having. So they're trying to create a medium like, can we just, focus on the sports game for now, or something, or put on a soap opera might even be better.
Well, I actually broke up with my gym because they wouldn't. They banned all the news stations on the television.
Yeah. You broke up with your gym. I like that expression.
I'm like, how am I supposed to stay awake on a treadmill? Like, I don't want to. I don't want to watch the Food Network while I'm on a treadmill. Like, that seems dumb.
So I do know, and I mentioned this in the beginning, that you were a stand-up comic, yet you talk about pretty serious conversations. How did all that come to be, and how does that work on an ongoing basis?
So I still say that I haven't done stand-up in 15 years, if you can believe it, since I lived in New York. And I was really fortunate in that I got to share some stages and tours with some pretty powerful, amazing figures who really became like father figures to me. But now that I'm doing keynotes pretty regularly, it's keynote with a point is kind of or stand-up comedy with a point are my keynotes. Sorry, I misspoke. And because I talk about everything that nobody wants to talk about, if you can use a sense of humor, you can actually equalize people in the room. Even if we go back to like your son's question, right? Like the teacher that your son has, like she's experienced whatever she's experienced, and that may or may not be similar to what other trans women have experienced. I don't know her. But we've all experienced like frustration or apprehension or pain or suffering or rejection. And there is something funny in that. And most stand-up is rooted in those experiences. I just use real life examples that are the things your grandma told you not to talk about.
Yeah.
So then if instead of using laughter as a salve, I use laughter to go a little deeper. And then I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again.
I want to go one more step on this, because this is something I've done a bunch of workshops, and there's a woman who I work with who's actually been on the show who is a stand-up comic. And it's actually great for a lot of the interactive work that we'll do with clients. And I speak like you do, and many times we'll have follow-up sessions that get a little bit more deeper with some of the people in the company. And we've flipped roles in certain ways of doing things. And one of the things, there's a little bit of shock and awe that we go with. And there are things that in society, if you would, or American society, that she can get away with saying that I couldn't get away with saying because of who we were as a man or a woman. And we had an entire topic of conversation. You think that works to your advantage, being a woman, being able to talk about a lot of these uncomfortable things, because some of these topics, if they come off from a man, might rub the wrong way.
Absolutely. But that's consistent across all forms of comedy. So as a white woman, I can talk about a lot of things that other women of color can't, and certainly men can't. But I also think as someone that, without ever asking me or making me fill out some kind of intake survey, I look pretty liberal. And so to be able to make fun of liberals or the Democratic Party or democracy in general, I can talk about those things because the stereotype of this kind of, to reference Glenn Beck for a second, the pinko commie socialist liberal, which you can't be all of those things, but good job. But to come out on stage and look that way and then know more about the Constitution, or when I start talking about like guns, for example, like I can hold my own on the Second Amendment and why this is important and why hunting is important from an environmental standpoint. And I can also talk about it as to what the other side of the conversation is. Right. That's actually part of my branding, right? Is that I'm able to get through all of the difficult conversations so that people in the room feel heard. And then what's more fascinating to me is that people are so busy hating this quote unquote other side. And if they really looked at their arguments, they're actually saying the same thing. They're just getting there. They're on the same page. They're just getting there from different sides.
How are you the white guy whisperer, and what is that about?
That is a perfect example, actually. So I'm originally from Texas.
Okay.
I grew up with hunters. My father and my uncle were professional athletes, which my uncle was actually a professional football player, and in Texas, football is its own religion. And
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I am pretty super liberal and very, very familiar with the kind of, I don't want to call it a potbelly. Let's just say that it's stressful for a belt white guy who is mandated to go to a diversity training and has been talked over or blamed for everything wrong in the entire universe, and how that's really annoying and isolating and feels bad. And I am an equal opportunist, right? So everyone got us here, and it's going to take everybody to get us out. And so very often, specifically like 40 to 60-year-old white men will come up to me afterwards, and the room is empty, so no one witnesses it. And they'll tell me that they actually felt welcomed to a conversation for the very first time, and that, you know, they have not just that they have families or grandkids or something, but they also like are a neighbor or a person in the grocery store, and to feel part of the community and to feel part of the solution is a very new experience for a lot of these white men. And to get it from someone who's packaged like me tends to be pretty shocking. And then they're kind of a fan. And it's not 100% of the time, but it's certainly a lot of the time.
I'll tell you this, and for the listeners, and we'll have show links to this after this episode to Jess's website and to Good Enough Now, which we'll talk about in 1 second. The first thing you'll do is you'll look at the video and you'll see certain components of you, as you said, from shorter hair, tattoos, all those things that would get people to have a certain assumption about someone right away. And the minute you start talking, it's inviting and opening to make you think a little bit differently. And I think, by the way, the world needs more people like that. So thank you in advance, by the way, or in the past, for everything that you've done and are continuing to do, because it's a really powerful way to help connect people. And I like this way that you've styled it, if you would. So really, kudos. That's me clapping over here on this end.
And I think it's also important to mention that the stand-up background has also been really helpful, right? So, like, if it could go wrong, I've probably experienced it, and so I'm pretty unflappable. So, like, I remember not the most recent presidential election, but one in the past. It's funny because guns came up again already. But two guys showed up to one of my keynotes brandishing weapons, and both handguns. And I think if you show up to a keynote with a weapon, like you're either an armed professional or you have some kind of issue that you're trying to like transpose onto me, except I'm unflappable. Anyway, so brandishing a gun is illegal, P.S. Having a gun is not illegal everywhere, but having one on your person varies. But brandishing it is like waving it around, putting it on the tabletop in front of you, pointed at me. That is actually not legal. So anyway, so they were trying really hard.
Let alone could be a little scary.
Could be, yeah. So I did notice that some of the other attendees were a little nervous about it, so I just needed to address it. And so I just said, like, hey guys, you know, nice job. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you're not allowed to brandish your weapon. So I imagine sitting in these chairs with it on your belt might be uncomfortable. So if you need to, you can go put it in your car. But if you're putting it on the table to be intimidating, just so you know, the safety's on, so it's not really working.
Nice.
And like, just to be able to do that, like, names it in the room. The people who were uncomfortable got more comfortable. They realized they're not going to get a rise out of me, and they're welcome to stay. And they ended up leaving. Right. You know, so I did not whisper them.
It seems like it's part of your brand, and I think that's a great way. By the way, calling the 800-pound gorilla out right in the beginning is always a good tactic anywhere.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, and why are you showing up to a keynote with a gun?
Yeah, I know, exactly. which I was going to say is, like, you know, you think they're going to take out the keynote instead of throw tomatoes? I don't know. You never know.
Right.
I haven't had that yet.
That's what an evaluation form is for.
I haven't had a situation where I've been speaking in front of a large group of people and weapons have been thrown at me. I think they've wanted to, but no one seemed to have come through with it yet. So the year's still young, Jess, so we'll see what happens. Good.
Could also be a different between a man and a woman.
Very possibly. Very true. Good enough now. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, the way you've branded this and the message that you have. And obviously there's a book affiliated with it as well. This is like the beginning of you starting to plug. We'll give you a chance to plug it after, but give us a little bit about what's the methodology behind it.
Sure. So in my burnout, I realized that this kind of American exceptionalism and perfection and things like that were really preventing myself and my audiences to engage in conversations that they were a little more nervous about. And the idea of Good Enough Now is if you can utilize your own lived experience and the skills you currently have to do something some of the time, that's better than just completely opting out.
Right.
So that's really where it came from. And I knew I was onto something that when I first started kind of test piloting my new brand and what eventually became the book title, the only pushback I got were from people that were like, no, America's exceptional. And I was like, great. Do you feel exceptional? And they would just repeat from this like group membership place, America's exceptional. I'm like, great. How are you, Mark? Like, just Mark, how are you? Do you feel exceptional all the time? And eventually they'd be like, well, it's good enough. And I'm like, exactly. So then I also interviewed a bunch of my audiences. So those of us that listening or whatever that are speakers or trainers, one fun fact is that you will never be your own audience member, ever. So it's important to listen to them. And when I was polling them, no matter what program I was doing for them, this kind of theme started showing up, which is do the best you can with what you got some of the time. And staring in front of me, right in front of my nose, was really my own like personal mantra, right? And so doing the best you can with what you got some of the time is really about being good enough. So if there's a possibility of a possibility, or you try to try, like these things are that like very beginning, it articulates the very tipping point of when we actually do start engaging. So that's what I do.
I like it. And it's effective and it's simple. I think that's always the big thing. Anytime you have real simple, quick words too, you get right to the point and it works effectively. So please, Jess, can you give us all the play? Actually, before we get there, I got a question which I haven't yet to ask you. I love asking the Thrive Loud guests when they're having an off day and things aren't quite the way you'd like things to be, and you're not really on the thriving track. Who do you seek out to get yourself back on it?
Dark chocolate with sea salt.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm not going to dig any deeper in that because it just works really well. It helps because who we could possibly turn down. Dark chocolate, by the way, is my favorite. Yeah. Much more so than
I'm on this new thing. I don't know if people have Costco, but there's these new things that are squares of caramel in dark chocolate with sea salt on top. And that is pretty much the only motivation I need to get back to work.
Just for the record, I think what you just described is illegal in 6 states because that's just too good of a combination. Oh, yeah. And we're going to have to check the laws with that, along with brandishing guns. That's like brandishing chocolate in places that you shouldn't.
Well, so, I mean, I do live in California, so we're pretty liberal.
Ah, fair enough. I got to say, you guys, California created the Trader Joe's, and they've got those dark chocolate almonds, which I'm literally popping more than, Flintstone vitamin pills, which is pretty good. So I'm a big fan. Give us all the places, Jess, where we can learn about you, websites, social media, everything we need to know so that the Thrive Loud listeners can find out more about Jess Pettitt.
So goodenoughnow.com is the website. You can reach me at Jess, like the beginning of Jessica, not Jeff, Jess at goodenoughnow.com. I give listeners a texting number, which in case you have any questions or any particular difficult conversation topics or need advice, texting number is 202-670-4262, 202-670-4262. I get text all day long. It's great. Keeps me on my toes, and I'm happy to give you some advice or help out in whatever way I can. And then if you're interested in the book, which is called Good Enough Now, You can get it from my website or any of the online bookstores of preference that you might be interested in. And that's it.
That's great stuff. Jess, do me a favor. Give me, I know you had trouble narrowing it down, but obviously I know we're going to get along the next time we get a chance to hang out, because share with the Thrive Out listeners some of your all-time favorite movies.
Oh, that was a really hard question. I really am an original Ghostbusters, Three Amigos, Jumping Jack Flash genre. Back in the day when we had VCR tape stores where you would rent movies, I could just hang out in that aisle and pretty much be okay. Because you'd bump into like, Weekend at Bernie's. I totally forgot about that one. Girls Just Want to Have Fun, right? Like with Sarah Jessica Parker, Helen Hunt. These are classics that did not win any awards.
I totally love that. There's you'll get a chance to go back before this episode is aired. I think it might be episode 101. It was on Sibling Day, and my two sisters came on the show, and we discussed our childhood and growing up, and not only Three Amigos or Airplane, or the Naked Gun movies, but Spaceballs were a lot of the movies that sung true to our heart. But these would fall right in line there with the Ghostbusters and Jumping Jack Flash.
Oh, these are cinematography gems.
I love it. This was great stuff, Jess. This was fun. I love getting to connect with people who, like you, have a different way of thinking of things, but also have a great delivery on top of it. And I'm hoping our paths will cross sometime soon, either on some speaking stage or somewhere out there, or I get a chance to see you again. And thank you so much for coming on Thrive Loud.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
No, totally a pleasure. And to all the Thrive Loud listeners out there, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Thrive Loud. Or find us on the web at thriveloud.com.
Lou Diamond, always bright, always shining, from the light shining off his bald head.